This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you very much for joining us for this presentation, which is looking at this interface between planning and action. And it's an area that ties in obviously very nicely with these CPSG series of webinars where we've been looking at an understanding of planning tools and processes. And we're planning for something, and we're planning for action. We're not planning for plans to sit on the shelf. But the more we can kind of dig into and understand how we can do better planning that will contribute to more effective implementation, the better. And this is one of the first of the webinars where we'll get a chance to start thinking about this through the eyes of iguanas, or at least people who are planning for their conservation. Before I hand the baton over to Lee, what I wanted to just ask you, just put in the back of your mind that at the end of the talk, it would be really good to have hear some of your insights in this connection between planning and implementation. So you get a plan written, and to what extent is it implemented? What does that tell us about the planning process? What lessons can we learn to inform future planning processes and help them to be a bit more effective? I'm sure Luke will raise some of these points as he goes through them, looking at the beautiful Caribbean iguanas. So in terms of organising, if you have a question, you write your question in the chat box, then I will see that. And if it's a clarifying question, I'll interrupt Lee and ask the question. If it's one that could be saved for a time when Lee's drawing a breath or where there's a logical point for us to ask questions, then I'll let you know as well. But please keep the chat room busy, and I will respond to you in that. And then towards the end, we'll also then get a chance for a more open discussion where we pick up some of the questions and take other ones that you might have. So Lee, can I pass over to you and perhaps start off with your video, and leave you to introduce yourself, your work, and then we can get started with the presentation.
Sounds great. Thank you, Jamie. Just want to say hi to everyone from Tucson, Arizona. It's 9 a.m. in the morning here. And yeah, it's great to be talking about planning to action. It's something I strongly believe in. I really like species recovery plans, but more than the planning themselves, I like implementing them. And I've learned some lessons that I'm going to be talking about today. I have a slide on my background and some information on that, so I won't go into that right now. I assume this will take around 20-ish minutes, and then we'll have time for questions and let you get back to your workday, or as for you and across the pond, Jamie, stopping your workday. So let's get started. All right, just verification. You can see my slideshow, Jamie?
Yes, I can.
All right, perfect. Good. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Lee Pondy, and I'm happy to be presenting here about something I really enjoy, as I said, which is implementing action plans related to species conservation. Just a clarification, I will be using terms such as action plan, species recovery plan, or SRP interchangeably. There may be some slight differences among these, but as a group, these plans are used to define a healthy status for a species and provide a list of actions that, when carried out, should get the target species to that desired state. This will not be a research-based webinar. Instead, I'm going to be describing some of the important lessons I've learned in the almost 20 years of doing this work. If you need to contact me, you can see my email address there at the bottom. So I'm a big believer in leading by example, and so my webinar follows a path. And in case you thought I was going to use the word journey, I will not. Some of you may have heard of Simon Sinek's principle, start with why, and I think it's a good one. So why are we here? And I don't mean here on Earth, I mean, like, I can't help you with that, but why are we here in this webinar today? We're here to improve species recovery planning and implementation. Our assumption here is that improved planning leads to better efficiencies and outcomes for the benefit of the target species and the environment. Here are the main organizations that supported this work: International Iguana Foundation, San Diego Zoo, and then 2 specialist groups as part of the IUCN Species Survival Commission, the Conservation Planning Specialist Group and the Iguana Specialist Group. Just as a species recovery plan describes an end state, I'm going to tell you what the end state of my talk is. That is, what is the goal? After the webinar, 50% of the participants will feel they have improved their ability to implement species recovery plans. Notice that this is a SMART goal. It is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. If 50% of you improve your ability to do species recovery planning, even just a little, then I will feel that this talk has been successful. I also have a secondary goal. I would like the majority of the participants to know more about Caribbean iguanas. The goal of this is really participant dependent. I'm assuming that most of the people on this webinar don't know very much about Caribbean iguanas. But you can see that besides learning something about planning, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to improve your knowledge of and support for iguana conservation. And just like we do for a species recovery plan, I'm going to share with you the roadmap of how we are going to arrive at this desired state to reach those goals. Sharing this information is an important part of the process because by knowing how we're going to get there, you, the participants, are empowered to help us achieve the goals for this webinar. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my background. Then I'm going to talk about the taxa, the iguanas, their characteristics in the context for conservation. I'm going to go through an assessment we did for 4 different iguana plans, and I'm going to talk about lessons learned. And here's something else I like to do to keep my presentations a little more interesting. Like we see in movies these days, I've added an Easter egg to my talk. For those that haven't heard this term before, an Easter egg is a reference or piece of information that only certain people will understand. It's like a gift to fans. My Easter egg was in this image that I used for the announcement for my talk. Does anyone know what the Easter egg is here? Please type in your response. And I'm going to look at the chat room, Jamie, and just see if we have responses, if anyone understood what this Easter egg is in this image.
You're fooling everybody up to now, but we'll see if others. I'm looking at the clothes peg and wondering actually if you're hung on a clothesline at the moment. But that's I'm sure that's not the Easter egg. And I know what it is. I know what it is. I can see now. I think. I'm going to see if others.
All right, so I am not seeing anything in the chat room, so I'm going to start sharing it, and we'll see if someone jumps in before I get there. So you'll notice I have a headlamp on and cold weather clothes. I'm working at night and in a cold place, which means the reptile I have in my hand is not an iguana. Jamie, what is it?
A tuatara.
That's right, it's a tuatara found only in New Zealand. Tuatara is not only not an iguana, it is not even a lizard. So that's the Easter egg for the herpetologists out there, and we can get back to planning now. Just a little bit about my background. I have a history with engaging audiences for conservation. I'm certified to do interpretive planning for zoos and museums through the National Association for Interpretation. In 2000, I started working for the San Diego Zoo on a recovery project for Turks and Caicos rock iguanas, designing programs to inform and engage local audiences with the goal of making them partners in conservation. This project also had a component of engaging audiences at the San Diego Zoo. Around this time, I was asked to join the IUCN Species Survival Commission Iguana Specialist Group. Specialist groups are awesome. Hopefully most of you know about them. They're basically experts on different taxa who work together to protect species. And because of my interest in and experience with species recovery planning, I was invited to join another group that was helping improve species recovery planning for all of the SSC specialist groups. As you can see from this slightly dated poster on the right, as a group, Caribbean iguanas are some of the most endangered animals on the planet. When you look at the actual numbers of some of those species, you can see that they're incredibly low. Like many island endemics, these iguanas are not widely distributed and thus are more vulnerable to pressures such as invasive species. An interesting ecological point about these lizards is that they are the largest terrestrial vertebrates on their islands. They may be small, but ecologically they are the elephants of their island ecosystem. Now, what about the context for recovery planning and implementation? Context is very important for planning purposes. These island iguanas live in a unique socio-political and ecological system that is very different from mainland species. If you haven't seen Simon Hedges' webinar for CPSG about working on recovery plans for elephants, I suggest you do so. The situation he deals with is almost the opposite of what it is for Caribbean iguanas. These island iguanas are not adapted to deal with mammalian predators and thus are highly impacted by them, especially cats and dogs. There's also limited human take and conflict, again, the opposite of elephants. All of the island species have a range that is limited by the land itself. Most of their range is only one country, which means there's likely only one main management authority. We have a lot of information about their biology and natural history. They are not a major source of income, nor do they destroy crops like elephants do. And this situation is repeated on multiple islands in the Caribbean, allowing a little bit of control for reviewing different actions. And all of these factors play a role in the recovery process. To help with today's discussion, I'm going to use some information I gathered as part of a process to review the implementation of 4 SRPs for 4 different iguana species. The methods for this assessment were fairly basic. First, we had major stakeholders who were leading the implementation of the plans review the actions listed in the plans. They categorized the state of the actions as either complete or incomplete. Incomplete includes those actions that are in progress. Please note that this is a highly unscientific and really not repeatable study. It was a rapid assessment with a very simple methodology. Each of the recovery plans was completed at a different time, so there was not even a standardized time period for how long stakeholders had to work on the actions. As you can see, the results were somewhat disappointing. Actions completed were actually fairly low, averaging around 26%. We also divided up actions by the thematic area: policy, research, management, and education. Again, about 1/4 completion rate on average. Actions relating to research had the highest completion rate, while education is the second highest, then management, then policy at the lowest. Because this wasn't a scientific study, I don't have complete answers as to why these are ranked this way, but I have some ideas I will share. First, policy is an area that takes a lot of time. Legislation especially can take years. It's no surprise to me that it has a low completion rate. Research, on the other hand, is often carried out by scientists in developed countries whose work is not dependent on changing laws or perceptions, etc. So it's no surprise to me, again, that it has the highest completion rate. Management has the most total actions, which seems reasonable given that the species recovery relies on a number of actions relating to managing the species. I'm not actually sure why the completion rate is so low, but it deserves further investigation. The same for education. From my experience, SRPs have a lot of education-related goals. Only some of them are going to be accomplished. So now let's talk about what this means for SRP implementation. First, with 1/4 of actions completed, it is clear that plans are overly optimistic about what can be accomplished in a given time period. You could counter and say that the list is long so that there are lots of options, like a giant menu of activities. But what does research say about long lists of action items versus a limited list? Limited choices leads to better results. Plus, we're trying to be strategic here. There shouldn't be a giant menu. There should be an achievable number of activities, and that's all. Also, and this is maybe the most important thing I will say today, actions need prioritization. We cannot continue to make plans that don't incorporate a system of prioritization. Stakeholders who are implementing these SRPs need to know what to do first, second, third, etc. As part of the species recovery planning process, we need to set the priorities. Here are some of the suggestions I have for improving the species recovery implementation process. First, review plans at least annually. A plan that sits on a shelf is not useful. It's like that self-help book you haven't gotten around to reading. It's doing nothing if it's not pulled off the shelf and used. Second, make sure that you are following the priorities. It's not good enough to have priorities, they have to be followed as well. And third, when implementing, take into account agency or stakeholder operational scheduling. If the country's wildlife service does their annual work planning in August, don't revisit the SRP with them in October. Get on their schedule and work with them to integrate SRP goals into their annual work plan annually. Here are my 3 favorite tools for operationalizing an SRP. Spreadsheets, website or living documents, and hiring a coordinator. As someone who has worked to coordinate multiple stakeholders on implementation, and also as someone who believes that improved technology can simplify our lives, I've tried all kinds of software to help me manage the task of coordinating implementation. I've tried Google Groups, I've tried Basecamp, I've tried Asana, and I've tried other similar project management tools, and what I've come back to is spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are simple, utilitarian, and platform independent. You don't have to log into a site. You don't have to remember your password. I can even create a PDF of a sheet and email it to someone. They allow me to sort by due date, agency involved, etc. They are simple, and for coordinating a bunch of different people using different software, simple is great. I've been fortunate enough to work with a team at Google headquarters on a few projects, and I've learned a very important lesson from them. Keep everything in a website. This is especially true for workshops where there is a variety of information from timelines to logistics to participant lists. Keep all of it in a website and you won't be emailing people files all the time. Someone's looking for the agenda, it's on the website. Someone forgot what their actions were, it's on the website. Using a website is also great for transparency, which is something that we should be striving to uphold in this type of collaborative work. Finally, websites can be updated regularly so that they are the single place to go to for the latest information. Finally, hire a coordinator. Would you try to find a volunteer foreman to build your home? No, you would not. You get what you pay for, and a volunteer coordinator is not going to do the same job as someone who is paid to do it. Look at all these actions that need managing on this page. SRP implementation requires coordinating multiple groups. It's more like organizing volunteers than it is managing employees. Unlike with employees, these volunteers are not required to act on your wishes, and this is an important issue that plays a role in the recovery process. Organizing volunteers is a specialty and requires a different skill set than managing employees. Find someone who is good at that. And that's it. Thank you for your interest in species conservation planning and implementation. I hope you've learned something about something that you can use in your work, and that you've learned something about Caribbean iguanas as well. Here are some resources for you. You can find a PDF of this presentation with live links in it, along with some other tools at my website. The second one is a website I built for a workshop that I helped coordinate. Though some of the information is dated, I think it's organization, the way it's organized can help serve as a model for others to improve upon. And lastly, there's a link to an article that some of the data from today's talk was taken from. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Jamie, to see if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Lee, for that. So there's a number of points that you were raising there. Before, I mean, I had a few questions that were springing to mind, but I would be interested to see if others in the group do have as well. So you've got 2 options if you've got a question or a comment. You can either write it in the chat box, or just now, if you want to turn your microphone on, then if you leave them off if you don't want to speak, but if you turn them on if you would like to, then I can queue people up that way as well, looking at who's got their microphones turned green. So at the moment, Andrea has her microphone green. I don't know whether that means you have something you'd like to say. Andrea? No, you've made it ungreen. Okay, no problem at all. So is there anybody either with the chat room or with or elsewhere who'd like to ask a question? Okay, so Kerry, I like your suggestion of a website as information sharing resource. Do you also produce printed plans, or do you keep everything living on the website? Lee, over to you.
Yeah, there we go. Yes, we do both. I find that having a printed document is really important for, especially for government organizations to have on a shelf, to show it off, to be able to pull it down. So we used to print these and actually bring them to people, but nowadays they are PDF documents that live in the IUCN library, as well as in the libraries of other groups. As a PDF electronic document, it can be shared fairly easily and hosted on different websites. That being said, it is not as easy to update once it is in a document like this. And so there is some interplay between creating a website that is living and working, and these documents which are more static.
Thanks very much, Lee. I just wondered on your spreadsheet tracking. This is something because we're developing have been piloting a tool as well, and the focus has been around getting something that's simple. And there's always going to be this tension between that simplicity and collecting enough information to be, particularly helpful. One question I have was around understanding why actions might or might not have been implemented and the extent to which you try and capture that. Obviously, that could be quite sensitive, and but in terms of learning, then it's helpful to understand the reason.
Yeah, I agree. I think that more needs to be done around why. I think part of the issue here is that when you don't have prioritized actions, and when you actually have the number of actions that we see in some of these plans, there are a bunch of different reasons why. And I think really, if you have a small set of prioritized actions, then you could look at the whys for those, and there'd be a limited number. But doing the why for the, I want to say around 100 different actions, and that's probably not that many, 60 different actions that are in the Turks and Caicos management plan. Like, there's so many different reasons why. I don't necessarily know you could come up with a sort of unified issue or a set of issues. So one is just decreasing the number of actions will help you be able to determine your most important whys things aren't getting done. But yeah, I agree, Jamie, that delving further into the whys is an important part of the review process.
And I'm just keeping an eye on the chat room and the microphones, because I will let people speak. I encourage people to speak if they go. But I'll carry on asking some of mine. I wondered about the priority. You made the point several times about prioritizing the actions. And I wonder whether this is, in terms of learning about the planning process, whether this is highlighting a kind of perhaps a bit of a blind spot on area where we need to focus, which is in how you, not just how you say now we've got to prioritize, but you encourage people to perhaps let go of certain ideas. I imagine that some of the priorities that are coming out, if you looked at who has promoted them, that you will see some sort of correlation between the person's area of work and what they think of as a priority. And so that, there's do you see that? And is there kind of, you have to think quite carefully about how you help people let go of what they think of as being most important, because it's sort of very close to them. it's not necessarily so relevant for the species, but it's a hard process to let go, to feel that what your area of work might not be important in this case for that species.
Yes, exactly. I think that's a huge part of it. I think if you have a room full of educators, you will get a lot more of education-related actions that are in the plan. So I think it is really dependent on the planning process and who is in the room. And that's going to be really up to a skilled facilitator to help make sure that that process doesn't get too far weighted by the participants who either speak the loudest or are, you know, the majority of the people in the room. So getting down to the most important actions is a strategic process. And I think there are some collaborative ways to do that that are important. But again, it's sort of that balance between allowing people to feel like they have a role here and being strategic and being able to say to them that, you know, their role may be minimized if we're looking at the most important actions that need to be done. I've been working on some tools, looking at some tools to use in the species recovery planning process that will allow us to prioritize. And I haven't had enough practice with it, but we're going to be using it this summer in the Turks and Caicos. And I believe that you're right, Jamie. It is very much a blind spot for organizations doing species recovery planning, especially for the ones that I've worked on. I feel like a lot of what we have are wish lists and things we'd like to do, but we have not narrowed it down to the things that we must do. And I think really to make these recovery plans more valid and useful, we're going to have to start doing that. And it means that we're going to have to find a way to really prioritize actions so that when you say in the next 2 to 3 years, you really say, these are the ones that need to be done first, and these other ones may be able to get done, but that we really have to have priorities. Otherwise, it's just too big of a list of things that could be done, and that kind of choice allows people to pick and choose things that may not be that important.
Thanks for that, Lee. Kerry's asking, I don't know if you can see in the chat room, that you shared 4 distinct plans that were evaluated for 4 distinct species. Does your group ever develop simultaneous plans for multiple species? And what questions would you ask when deciding how to lump and split your planning processes when there might be overlap between species?
Yeah, most of these plans are done at the species level. And Carrie, thank you for that question. I think in general, we don't have to deal with a lot of species overlap. So we don't have to deal with that as much as, you know, a lot of these mainland species where they're going into multiple countries and overlapping of species and subspecies. There are a few islands where we do have to do it. And I think, you know, you could do an integrated plan between 2 different species. Generally, we've separated them out down to the species level to be able to do the plans and keep it specific to that species. But of course, when there is overlap in the range and the managing authority, you should be able to do plans at different levels.
Fantastic, thank you, Lee. And I have one more question, which was to do. All right, so I'll just quickly check and see. Yeah, sorry. Before I ask a question, Sarah, you have a question.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Great. Thanks, Lee. That was a really good talk. So it's Sarah Havery from RSPB. I just got a couple of questions, really. I was just wondering, like, what from your experiences, what's your best example of a species action plan, and what's made it so good? What was the kind of key ingredient? And I noticed you mentioned about reviewing annually. I was just wondering how best to actually do this without going through the whole process of getting all the stakeholders together again, because we're all aware that that's quite expensive. But I was just wondering, do you have any tips of how you can really keep these documents live and keep them being reviewed every year when, you know, everyone's busy and money's tight?
Yeah, great. Thank you for your question, Sarah. So the first question, the best plan, that is a great one, and I do not have a good answer for you. I feel like each of these ones that I've worked on and reviewed have different pluses and minuses. I wish I could say that there is a best plan. I think I would put that out to my colleagues at CPSG, Jamie and Caroline and others at CPSG who have a lot more experience with a wider variety of plans. I would love to see them put up something about the top 3 plans, or some of the best plans that they see out there, because I think their experience will lend itself to answering that question better. As far as annual review, I've tried a number of different things, Sarah, and I feel like the reason why I said hire a coordinator is partially to make sure that the process is followed up on annually. I feel like some of the best things that we've done are to create a spreadsheet of the goals for that year, things that you're supposed to achieve in that year, or and some that are upcoming, and then have regular meetings around how they were done. So you just hold maybe like a steering committee, or a small group of people holds a meeting, ideally not once a year. I prefer quarterly, but I think that might be too much. But if you could do twice a year, that would be better. And then you have this meeting, and then you go through the plan and you see where each of them is in the process. And it's really difficult because some of these organizations, we're not in charge of them. This is a collaborative working group. But like collaborative working groups, you have to be willing to say, yep, I haven't got to that. Or, hey, colleague A, could you make sure that this gets done by this time period? And someone takes notes, and then those notes are reviewed semi-annually, and you check up on it again. I don't think there is a perfect end-all be-all process for this, but especially for saving money, I think a lot of this can be done remotely. And ideally, at the beginning of this process, you set someone who say, like, I'm going to be, just like you have a timekeeper in a workshop, you say, this person is going to be the coordinator. They're going to be sending you a list, and it's going to have things that you're supposed to do on it. Please respond to them. And you sort of agree to be able to do that, and you get buy-in from the different stakeholders about when they would like to do that and how much work they can put towards it. Yeah, so in sort of summary, it's an imperfect process. Do what you can. Doing what you can will always be better than just letting it sit and reviewing it at the end of the time period, or saying we have to do a new one now. Making sure that someone is doing the part of reviewing the plan with the major stakeholders is an important part of the process.
Well, just building on what you've said, one of the areas that sometimes undermines projects, frustrates people, is that clarity around roles. And one of the points you're making there, Lee, is that being explicit about who's going to have responsibility, agreed responsibility to potentially modify actions, to meet up, make some decisions, modify actions, not around what we're ultimately trying to achieve, because that's something that that wider group agreed to. But if new information arises and suggests we need to take a different path, or this thing's not working terribly well, we need to try something else, or a new threat has emerged, then who has been agreed to take responsibility for those decisions, whether it's a steering group or some project board or somebody that the wider group is aware of, and hopefully can at least live with them being in charge of that process. Then that's going to make it that much more efficient for enough of the right people to be able to make the decision to change things on the ground. But that's often left the kind of the implementation framework. How you're going to structure organizations within the project is often left to the last minute. Really, you should kind of thinking about that in the preparing to plan stage, before you've even run, assuming you have got a workshop, right at the beginning, or you've written your plan, you're thinking about who's going to be involved in the implementation side, and therefore how could we carve out a group that might have oversight and is able to respond with new resources, or suggest change of tack, or whatever it might be, to keep the project on course once the plan has been produced. And there is I would encourage you to have a look at the Second Nature book, which is on the CPSG website, which is it's not so much a critical review of plans, but is some provides some nice illustrations of projects where, you know, what people are saying about how the planning process has helped in different ways. So that's one resource of a dozen or so case studies worth having a look at. More recently, I know, partly because I've been in discussions about it, there was the Bellinger River snapping turtle plan. It was mainly around disease management for that species. But from what I can tell, and I wasn't involved in the planning process at all, but from what I can tell, has been a really good example of planning moving quite swiftly and efficiently into implementation, and you know, animals getting whatever it's to do with the captive breeding for release, etc., monitoring in the wild. But there seemed to be quite a lot of clarity around who was going to do what by when, what the actions were that they were going to do, which I think probably some of the points that you're making, Lee, about ingredients for success, or at least make it more likely to be implemented, were introduced into that particular project. And that plan, along with many other plans, are on the CPSU website, so you can have a look at that. And I can put you in touch with Caroline if you'd like to find out more about that. Or we can ask the wider group about plans that they feel are really do demonstrate implementation. But thanks very much for the question, sir.
Just as a follow-up to that, to Sarah's question, I honestly, Sarah, I feel like we've been doing plans incorrectly. If you think about plans as the two main components are the quality of the information and the buy-in from the people that have to implement them, I think we've been weighted too heavily on the buy-in part. We allow people to play a role, to give information about what they think should be done, and I think that's great. I think that capturing that information and having a collaborative process for doing this work is very important. But what we've come up with, at least the work plans that I've been on, are just too long of a list of things that could be done. Really, to make these plans more useful, we have to start getting that number of actions down to a reasonable number, because once you do that, you will be able to review the plans more quickly, and you'll be able to work with the stakeholders on them. Right now, you pull a plan off the shelf and you thumb through it and you're like, wow, this is onerous. This is way too much information. If you have, you know, tell the management authority they have 3 things that they have to get done in the next 2 years, that's much more doable. It's more likely they'll respond to you. So I think really improving the whole process begins with prioritizing our actions and having less information in these plans. Less will be more.
Thank you so much, Jamie and Lee. That was really helpful.
Thanks for your questions. And Lee, just kind of going along from that in terms of cutting down on actions, because a lot of these authorities or groups or individuals, they're not just dealing with this species or this group of species, they're also dealing with a ton of other plans, and they're often not sort of collated. They're often separate plans having to work on sometimes conflicting deadlines, and obviously tension over budgets and the rest of it. And I wondered, at least within specialist groups, to what extent do you think we at least check whether or not others might be working in a similar area or similar group of species before we complete a planning process, so we can do more piggybacking of certain projects on others? Or do you think is that unrealistic?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think piggybacking is unrealistic. I think, you know, it's very easy for us to each get into our silos in our areas. You know, if someone's working on a Chacoan peccary, they're not necessarily going to look at a bird species and where the overlap is. And I don't have an easy answer for that, but I think that, yes, I think that in many of these cases, we have to be ready to collaborate more and work with what's already been done. I think sometimes it just seems easier to redo something because then you don't have to go back and review the information and see how it fits. I think that seems like a lot more work, but I think overall it makes things more efficient to do that, that piggybacking is a great idea and should be ideally done more.
And we'll see if there's a couple more, any other questions, and then we will wrap up. So I know everyone's got other things that they're going to do, but I have one more question, which is about your reference to a coordinator for the project. And we're talking more about, and it's not new, other people use the term, but sort of species champions. And I wondered on the characteristics of these individuals who can do it effectively, how much authority do you think the coordinator needs to be able to pull rank or to be able to get people to do things? Or is it, is it enough for them to just be the kind of the information provider and giver, and that's sufficient to kind of get people keeping on task?
Yeah, I think that could be run. I think that can be done either way. I think that just having someone to prepare the information and hand it out is a great way to do things. They don't necessarily need to have authority. I mean, I think it's great if they have rapport with the agencies or stakeholders that are involved, so people know them and can trust the information. But barring that, you don't want to have that be a criteria that you always have to have. So you could hire someone that nobody knows to just be able to get you the information, almost like an administrative assistant to say, okay, people, here's what you said you'd do by March. Here are the things that you said you'd do. Now you guys go off and discuss these things and see about why they weren't done or what's been done, and then get me the information back. So I don't think that they necessarily have to have authority. I think sometimes in these groups, you already have a collaborative process between researchers and management authority and government. And you don't have to integrate someone else in there. If there's someone that would serve that role that's already in that group, great. But if there's not, hire or make someone the lead in terms of being the whip and being able to pull out that information and get it to everyone and organize a meeting to discuss it. That's all that's needed, is really a lead person to make sure that it gets done regularly.
Thank you so much, Lee. So if I was to vaguely try and summarize, and then you can add if you feel like I'm missing something, and others, if you've got any last questions, put them in the chat room or turn your mic on and we'll take them. The first thing is we've got to be much tougher on ourselves, however many people are coming together around actions, to be able to whittle it down to a core set of actions that are going to have the most impactful on what we're trying to achieve, and that will pay dividends later on in terms of implementation if we can go through that a bit of pain at that particular point. And that alongside that, those actions, somehow you're thinking about how you can keep live updates around them, whether it's spreadsheets or websites, whatever it might be, somewhere where everyone knows they can go to, and it can be a public space for that group, so people know who's doing what and when, what they said they were going to do, but find a way of being able to track progress. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. Just make sure people know what they said they signed up to do and to what extent is it being kept on track. And then ideally you've got somebody there whose job it is to kind of be that not caveat, the sort of the link point between what was said to be done and where are we now. So you just keep that drip feeding, you hopefully keep a bit of pressure on, keep people's focus on the eye on the ball so that we have more chance of the project being implemented. Was there anything else in particular that I missed apart from Tuataras?
No, I think that's a great summary, Jamie.
So Lee, thank you so much indeed for that. It was lovely, because I was thinking, oh my gosh, Lee's finished, and I what am I going to say? But actually, it's been lovely being able to have this much more time for conversation. And I think what we must do in the next webinar is flag it up in advance and try and get people thinking about some of these questions, so that we can spend more time on discussion and use this presentation as a springboard, and I think you've done that superbly. So thanks very much for that, Lee. thank you very much, everyone, for listening. The next webinar we're going to be running is going to be around multi-species planning. And we'll send further details on when that, well, I know it's going to be the 24th of July, but I'll send further details on that, who's going to be running that. You'll receive them from CPSG later, and I hope many of you are able to join us for that. Lee, and also we'll put this up on the CPSG website, so you'll be able to listen to the recording of the webinar afterwards. Lee, thank you very much indeed, and have a very good day.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll talk to you soon.